Welcome to the Baunfire. I am Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this is a podcast about video game news, speculation, rumors, and reviews. This week I'll be covering new The Division 2 content, BioWare is being sued, and then some, me being a YouTube partner now, and much more. A few things before we get started. Subscribe to the channel on your favorite podcast platform, including iTunes and Spotify. On YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button for this video, comment with your thoughts, questions for next week, or to just say hello, and become a member if you'd like to support this podcast and the rest of my content. A special thank you to all my patrons, including producer level patron Hassan, supporter level patrons PK, The Dawn, Cage Nephilim, and Neuronix, as well as viewer level patron Zenra. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and getting ad-free episodes for as little as $1 per month, please check out patreon.com/bondiesel. Patreon also did a bunch of updates recently, where there's like chat rooms and stuff like that. I'm exploring those things, and we'll just kind of see what I'm going to use and what I'm not. So we'll see. Okay, so let's get into the gaming news. This week, I have 12 topics. First topic is The Division 2 Year 5 Season 2. So if you're a Division fan and you've been continuing to play the game and pay attention to all of the updates, there was a pretty solid update that just came out, which was preceded by a live stream where they talked about all the stuff. It was Yannick, who's the creative director of the Division 2 currently, and Daria, who's one of the community developers. These streams are tough. I still would argue that they would be better off putting out like a 10-minute pre-recorded, like edited, nice tight video to explain the things that are coming, the things that are changing, and to do it a little more efficiently. Instead, they do these like hour and a half streams where it's just awkward, and I don't think it actually presents information very well. It's there used to be kind of a charm to their live streams, especially like the State of the Game, where they did these weekly news streams for the Division 1 and 2 for a while. But their production levels got pretty good, and they got into a pretty good flow, and these streams they don't happen often, and you can tell it's not what these individuals are doing on a day-to-day basis, and it's just I don't know, I don't think it's the best way to disperse this info, but whatever, it's all good. For what they actually showed us was they talked a bit about the new incursion. There's an incursion, which if you didn't play Division 1 or 2, Division 2 has raids. What you think of when you think of like Destiny 2 or Destiny in general and its raids. Now in the Division, they're actually 8v8, where there's 2 teams of 4 that have to work together and do these raids. In the Division 1, there weren't raids, but there were these things called incursions. And what they essentially were like mini raids, and they were 4-player co-op, and they had matchmaking and all of that stuff. So this incursion coming back to Division 2 is a pretty big deal. It's I assume an acknowledgement of, I think, that the raids weren't very successful. They just didn't really design those raids to work for the player base that the Division has. The Division has kind of a notoriously hot and cold community, at least in my observation, where they don't stick around, but when you put out new content, they come back in droves. So the problem is when they would do these raids, they were 8-person raids, where even Destiny only does 6, and it has a much healthier and a much more consistent player base, it seems. And they did these 8-person raids, and they did 2 of them, and they were kind of mired by other issues, accusations of cheating, the world's first people supposedly having inside info on or maybe data mine stuff. It's that got ignored real quick, probably for a reason. But the raids to me just always felt like kind of a waste of development time and stuff like that, because I just don't think that the raids were really meant for the community that the Division has, where these incursions, these smaller bits of content, seem to be. I jumped into this incursion and tried to match make it in the first couple hours it was out, and it was a nightmare. My build was not built for this content, and people didn't know what to do yet. I suspect if I jump in now, it'll be better, and I can do a little research and see how you actually do the raid or the incursion. So that seems like good content. I don't know how repeatable it's going to be, but it seems like people are overall happy with it. Now, the thing with season 2 is each season has a manhunt. And the manhunt this time is the recruiter. So in the division, there's these kind of shadowy figures who are kind of like your main antagonist. And they're called hunters, where you play as an agent. And these hunters have had this presence throughout the entire franchise of being these kind of like really scary, very formidable, again, mysterious, kind of all in black, wearing heavy armor and being like, having similar tech skills as you. These really interesting figures to fight against and learn more about. And the recruiter is the main target for this season's manhunt. This hunter has shown up in previous content in the Division 2, where they've been kind of building up to that this hunter has been scouting you as your player out this whole time, and we'll kind of have to see where they're going to go with that. I hate the design of this hunter. The hunter had a more typical design. This recruiter hunter had a normal design in previous content where they showed up, and for whatever reason they've decided to make them look completely different and not actually even look like a hunter. It's really weird. It's, in my opinion, it looks kind of tacky or cheesy, but it doesn't matter, I guess. We'll fight them at the end of this season, which is a few months away. If you don't know, if you don't know anything about this game, they used to do, I believe it was 3 weeks. So every 3 weeks, there would be a new like a lieutenant that you would go after. So the way the manhunts work is there's the main target, but you have to take out 4 targets before you get to that. And so the first target would come out, then 3 weeks later, second target 3 weeks later, third target 3 weeks later, fourth target, and the final manhunt. And I believe they've extended that out to like 4 or 5 weeks each. And so it sounds like they basically just needed more time to get this content done before it came out, and that means that these seasons are going to be much longer, and that this year 5 isn't even going to end probably, I think, until like next spring or even early summer. So there you are. And then they're going to do a cosmetic event as well. It's a cyberpunk event. They didn't just like come out and say it, even though it's obviously what it is. I'm sure there's people who are into it. I think the gear that they showed off looked pretty awful. I don't know. I've acknowledged and I've accepted that literally years ago, they basically, the aesthetic style they've gone for with the Division 2 and the post-release content, especially with cosmetics and stuff, is just not my taste. And it seems like they're having fun with it. So for the devs, that's cool. I'm excited for them. But I don't get it. I really basically everything, and they've always been so antagonistic about being like, well, we know everyone just wants tactical stuff, but we can't just do that. And then they've done like 2 like tactical cosmetic drops, and the first one was just extremely low quality and all of the gear looked really awful. And then the second one, it was kind of the same thing. Like it just, none of the stuff was like, I don't know. Maybe it's the grass is always greener. You get what you want. You don't like it. Maybe that's why they don't do it again. But I don't know. I'm in a weird spot with Division 2. So we know Division 3 is in like early thoughts. It's not even in pre-production as far as we know. The Division 2, some people seem to think that they're going to keep supporting it for like years and years. I don't see how or why. My issue is that the content they're putting out is really impressive for the pretty small team that they have, and I imagine pretty limited budget that they have. But I think each season, the content, it just seems to have a lower and lower quality bar. And I think at some point, it's like damaging to the brand to keep putting out this content that's just so like just fine, but not really that good. And maybe that's just me. I'm sure there's a lot of people who disagree, but I would really like them to they can give Division a break. They can have year 5 finish up, start running through all of the content again, doing all of the global events and all of that stuff again, like what they've done with Division 1, except they have a lot more variety here that they can do, and just focus on Division 3. That's where the money is going to be, and that's also where the content is going to be in the long run. So if it's between say they do a year 6, and that means that Division 3 is like 6 years out, or they end at year 5 and the Division 3 is like 3.5, 4 years away, I would take the second one all day, every day. I just don't think that whatever content they're gonna put out with a year 6 of Division 2 is gonna feel like it's worth what it's probably gonna cost. So that's just my take. But overall, I'm happy that they're putting out more content. More Division is always a good thing, and I'm excited to jump into this sooner than later. Oh, BioWare. So BioWare is being sued by the employees it laid off a month or so ago. They laid off 50 employees that seemed like they were mostly working on Dragon Age Dreadwolf. It seems like it was mostly writing staff, though there were more technical jobs that seemed to be laid off as well. And so what's happened is, of those 50, 7 people have decided to file a lawsuit as a group to essentially get a better severance package. So it seems like the typical severance package that one would get would be about a month of pay for every year that you worked there. And some of these people worked there for 15, 20 years, quite a few of them, and I believe especially these 7 who were suing. And I believe that the package they were offered was essentially half of that. I don't understand Canadian law. I don't know labor, all of that stuff. None of that stuff. I'm not an attorney. I don't live there. I don't even know that stuff that well here in the States, because I'm pretty sure there just basically isn't any of that kind of stuff. But it seems like they shortchanged them, and their attorney even alleges that they were like guilt tripped to take that lower deal, because if they took the full deal, the what's expected, I think even what's legal, they were being guilt tripped into saying something like it could damage the rest of the team that's still going to be there. And basically, I assume blackmailing them and being like, if you take your full severance, we're going to shut down BioWare or something. Like, it's just really messed up stuff. If it's true, which I assume it is. I mean, it was a lot of these statements came from a document that was filed by the attorney for the people doing the lawsuit, and it was like a statement of fact or something like that. So you can't enter that kind of info and like exaggerate it too much or lie about it, because you'll get yourself in a whole lot of trouble and end up going to jail yourself. So it seems like, for whatever reason, even though EA has almost unlimited resources, and where BioWare may not individually as a subsidiary, you got to treat your people right, especially when you're firing them. You have to do this the right way, and it seems like they didn't. And if I remember correctly, I saw somewhere that in this lawsuit, they aren't just asking for what they were deserved, the month of pay per year that they worked there, but now they're asking for 6 weeks, a month and a half of pay for every year they worked there. And good for them. That's what they should get. An annoying part about this, though, was another article that came out this week that basically was titled to say, BioWare fires all unionized QA testers. And that headline is like, oh my God, like, what are they doing? Like, why are they laying all these people off? Why are they firing all these people? Like, isn't it illegal to fire unionized workers, blah, blah, blah. Well, and if you actually read the story, this was from Polygon. The headline implied that BioWare fired these people. The story clarifies that it was a third-party QA studio that had a contract with BioWare. That contract ended in August, and then here in October, they laid 13 of their workers off because they didn't have a new contract for them to work on. The toppers on this story is that these QA workers unionized over the summer, and there's some concern that the contract wasn't renewed because of that, because it cost too much, which is how contracts work. You're allowed to do that. Or that they didn't get them new contracts, the third party company they worked for, because they were unionized. There's also the topic of, it's kind of a shady practice in general for a company like BioWare and EA to be contracting with third party for QA at all, instead of just hiring their own, because they're plenty big enough to do that. The only defense to that I can see is that QA is probably a boom and bust need in studios, where there may be times, like right now with Dragon Age Dreadwolf, they are probably testing it extensively as it leads up to release, and so they need a lot of QA people. And then I assume when after a game comes out, and they may not have a game coming out really soon, like BioWare won't, it isn't worth having the QA staff as big, I guess. That seems like a stretch as well, though. This story sucks because the 50 people getting laid off from BioWare and these 7 people suing is a legit, very, it's a big deal, and it's a story that should be covered, and BioWare and EA should catch a lot of hell for it, right? This story is a little different because there is some shadiness going on from EA and BioWare just doing these contracts in general. But then this article was definitely playing off of the legit issue, the story of the 50 layoffs and the 7 people suing, and it by implying that BioWare was the one who fired these people, which they weren't. It's trying to drum up that story a bit more, where when you actually read the article, it explains really clearly that it was just a contract situation, and it sucks that QA studio laid them off, because it's that QA studio's job to find new contracts with any publisher, to give these people a job to do, and it seems really shady that they didn't do that. And I think it's interesting. There's this tendency to dogpile, and that's kind of what's happening here, because the fan reaction to this QA situation is implying that most of those people just read the headline and didn't read the article. Even the author of the article, I responded to him and I said, hey, who writes the headlines for an article like this? Because the headline is basically a lie, and the article explains the truth. And they didn't respond to me, but I noticed on their personal Twitter, they said, for people who didn't read the article, and then they explained what really happened. The problem is that she was talking to the people who, were unhappy about the headline or whatever. And I'm not unhappy with the headline because of what it says. I'm unhappy with it because it's not true, because it's not accurate. And it was obviously sensationalized for clicks, because these, the layoffs at a QA studio, the layoffs at BioWare, are all stories that are bad enough already. They don't need exaggeration or sensationalism or lies. They are bad. These are bad things that are happening, and they are a big enough deal to report on honestly. And it's just kind of frustrating for me to see stuff like that. And whenever I see games journalists and stuff kind of commiserating over how they catch so much hell from gamers and stuff, much of the time it's not deserved. Much of the time it's weird incel due to, unfortunately, probably kind of look like me, who are just being weird about stuff and doing console war stuff, or being gamergatey, stuff like that. But then you have a situation like this with this article, where it probably wasn't the author, it was probably her editor wanted a spicy headline that, even if it wasn't really true, and so they did it, and now that writer's catching hell. And that's why I made sure not to be antagonistic towards them, because I'm willing to bet they probably don't love the headline either. They probably love the clicks their article's getting, but maybe not the reason it's getting them. And I just I don't know. It sucks. BioWare and EA look pretty awful for the layoff in general, for not appropriately compensating these people, especially if they did try to like badger them into taking a lesser deal, and a deal that may even be illegal under Canadian labor law. Again, that's outside of my purview. And I hope that if they win their lawsuit, and I really hope that what I saw about them trying to get 50% more than what they were even owed is true, because they should. It's the pain and suffering thing, right? That they in EA and BioWare should, they tried to pull something shady, they got caught and called out, and now they should have to pay, right? This third party thing with the QA staff, like I really wish that QA studio was catching a lot of hell. And maybe there's a place to look at EA and BioWare and say like, hey, come on, you don't need these kind of shady third party QA studios, just do it yourself. So hopefully something comes of all that. I've seen people saying like, oh, I don't even want Dragon Age Dreadwolf and stuff anymore. Like, I get that take. I don't share it. There's still, hundreds of thousands of people working on this stuff that, putting their blood, sweat, and tears in it. Even the people who were laid off, I've seen many of them saying that they like really are excited about Dragon Age Dreadwolf, and they wish the best for the people still working on it, and they hope people love it as much as they do. Like, there's a lot of good juju around Dragon Age Dreadwolf directly. But then when you talk about all this other stuff, it gets nasty, right? And on top of that, now BioWare's hiring again. They have 4 positions currently listed on their careers page. None of them which appear to be any of the positions that were laid off, but it's still not a great look. What does have a great look is Forza Motorsport. So on the Xbox first party exclusive PC and Xbox game, Forza Motorsport, the last one was Forza Motorsport 7. This one drops the number because they're trying to make it into like a platform, supposedly, where they're just going to build onto this game for a really long time. It has a Metacritic score of 85. I've played probably probably closer to 10 hours of this by now. I really like it. It's very good. In one capacity, it's definitely a like graphical showcase for Xbox, especially the Series X. This is set up really well with the gameplay modes, where there's a quality mode where it's 4K, 30 frames per second, like ray tracing, all the pretty stuff. It looks very good. There's a performance mode that's 60 FPS with variable resolution and no ray tracing. And it looks actually really good too. And it plays really well at that 60 FPS. And then there's performance ray tracing, which is it has ray tracing. It has like kind of subdued ray tracing, but it still has 60 FPS. And that's what I've been playing on. The reflections and stuff look great. The lighting is so nice. It's a mix of ray tracing and older school techniques, and it just looks so good. But the looks, for me, for the most part, looks on a game are typically a first impression. And then as you play the game, especially this one, it's more about the gameplay and like the progression, right? And so the progression of the Forza games has always been kind of weird in that it just didn't always feel super motivating to keep playing it. Like, it didn't keep pulling you in, where with this one it is there. I think it is has a good progression system. So you have a driver progression system where you have levels and stuff that you're earning, but then each individual vehicle does as well. And so when you start a race series with a car, it's pretty bare bones, and then as you can level up multiple times per race, and when you level up, it opens up new parts and stuff that you can buy for your car, as well as the currency to buy those parts. And what's really fun is that you'll have there's a circuit where there's 5 different races. So in the first race, your car is pretty much bare bones. By the final race, you're like probably upgrading it as much as you're able, and your car from the first race to the last completely different. But it happens subtly through all the races, and it's really fun. On top of that, just the feeling of the cars. Racing games are tough because you don't want them to be overly punishing. Forza isn't like a hyper realistic simulator. It's also not a straight up arcade game like Forza Horizon, for example. This is obviously living in a similar space as Gran Turismo, which is a Sony exclusive. And the cars, you can feel their like break point where like you can, the thing about racing, it's fun because if you do your brakes and your acceleration and your angles right, you can ride right on the edge where if you push it a little too hard, you're going to spin out and lose the race. But if you don't push it hard enough, you're going to lose because you aren't going to be competing. And the way that the weight of the cars and the way they move and the way you can feel the brakes and the tires and everything working together is you can feel that balance. And it's really cool because it has a lot of good feedback, both in the controller and visually, and it just does a lot of stuff so well. And it's just a very satisfying game to play. And on top of that, the sounds, like the engine sounds and the sounds of the environment, and like there was a really cool race where it was raining, and it was not raining very hard at the beginning of the race. You could hear the rain a little and the sound of the wet road and the splashes and stuff, but then I believe by the end of the race, it was raining. It must have different rain amounts, and it was raining really, really heavily at the end. And because of the sound of the rain and more water, and it just was really loud, and you could barely hear the car by the end of the race because it had become a more severe storm and stuff. It was really, really cool. And so the sounds, the engines, everything in this game sound really, really good. Even the like echoes and stuff. At first I thought there was a bug until I realized that when I'd be going near a wall or something, you would be hearing the echo of your engine. So it would sound like you're hearing it twice, but it only happens when you're near something that would reflect the sound. It's very good. Forza Motorsport's really good. Even the 85 Metacritic score, I think, is maybe a hair low from what I've played so far. I've seen some people say that that they don't like the progression system, things like that. I mean, that's gonna be so subjective. But for me personally, I'd have it closer to a 9 out of 10. It's very, very good. It looks really, really good. For people like me who basically play a racing game every 4 or 5 years when a new Forza comes out, which is what I typically do, and I'll dabble in like the arcadey games as well. This is great. I'm extremely impressed by it. Another game that came out this week was Assassin's Creed Mirage. This one I feel a lot differently about. Its Metacritic score is 77. This is the game that it was originally a DLC for Valhalla, which came out a couple years ago. There's a character in Valhalla called Basim, and he is one of the assassins, where in Odyssey and Origins, the whole idea of the actual assassins that you played as in Assassin's Creed 1, 2, 3, and Unity and so on, were kind of not very present in Origins and especially in Odyssey. And then in Valhalla, they were technically, but it was still just not the same. They've changed the game. Origins and Odyssey and Valhalla are a different type of game than the old school Assassin's Creeds. Well, Mirage was supposed to be a kickback to those old games, Assassin's Creed 1, Assassin's Creed 2 especially, and it is for sure. It was, like I said, supposed to be a DLC for Basim to explain his background, and instead they turned it into its own game. Okay, so the good of it is it takes place in Baghdad, in ancient Baghdad, and it looks very cool. The environment is very nice. It feels very alive. There's lots of NPCs. It has the old school parkour system, which feels really nice to play in again. It's also a little janky, but maybe that's a user error more than the game. And that's kind of where the nice things I have to say end. I've played 5 to 10 hours of this as well, and it looks real bad. I like the environment in general, but if you look too closely, I'm playing on my PC. I got a PC code from Ubisoft. Thank you, Ubisoft. They provided the code to me as a Ubisoft content creator. So I'm playing, I have a 5800X, a 4070 Ti, and 32 gigs of RAM. I'm playing this game at ultra high settings with no DLSS or anything. So I'm playing it the best it can look possible, and it looks awful. It looks so bad, and it's such a bummer because like it's on the Anvil Next engine, which is the same engine as the other Assassin's Creeds, Far Cry, the Ghost Recon games all use this engine. And I assume it's still competent when it comes to doing like big open world spaces, because all of those games do those well. But man, it's really suffering, and it looks so aged and so out of date when it comes to like a lot of the texture work is really low quality. My god, their faces, like the characters' faces and their eyes and their hair, they just look terrible. It looks so bad. Like it's really it's distracting how awful it is. You can tell this game was a smaller project because like all the cutscenes and stuff are done in engine, but they typically kind of guzzy those up a little bit to make them look a little bit nicer. This is just straight gameplay cutscenes, and they look real bad. Like it's just like their eyes, like this engine has always had a weird thing with like characters' eyes and stuff, like almost looking like buggy or being like standing out too much from the rest of the characters. It's like it doesn't look very good, and that can be made up for in gameplay. And I've played lots of games that don't look great and I feel outdated, stuff like that, because they're just fun to play, and I just haven't found the fun in the hours I've played this. I'm towards the end of my second Baldur's Gate 3 playthrough. I want to get back to playing some Division, some Mass Effect. I even want to do another Starfield playthrough eventually. And next year we should have like Senua's Saga and other games coming out. I want to get back to Battlefield 2042. And when I think about all of those things, I want to play more Forza too. When I think about all of those things, for me to play and to finish Mirage, it would, my first 5-10 hours of it should have me wanting more, wanting to, what happens with that storyline or with this. And I just couldn't care less. I couldn't imagine having less motivation to play a game. Like I haven't really been impressed with Cyberpunk. I would rather play Cyberpunk for the next 2 months straight than play more Mirage. It's just, and I have lots of problems with Cyberpunk. There's no hook. Nothing's pulling me in. It just feels like I have these feelings of like, oh, that's cool. They're kind of trying to do the old thing again. I do like that. I just wish it didn't feel like this game was 10 years old. Like, as much as people talk about like Starfield feeling outdated and stuff like that, Mirage feels legitimate. Like it feels like a DLC to Assassin's Creed 2. And I want to say with a remaster to bring it up graphically, and I'm sure it looks better graphically than Assassin's Creed 2, but from my eyes now, it just doesn't seem like it. It doesn't feel good to play. It doesn't look good to play. I'm bummed. I wish it was better, but here we are. Okay, Naughty Dog has laid off 25 contracted employees, and supposedly their multiplayer game has been put on ice. So the story came out this week. When it comes to the BioWare Naughty Dog Epic, it's a weird year because from a gameplay quality, from like a game quality standpoint, 2023 has been one of the best years in the history of gaming. From a game industry health point of view, this may be the worst year ever. So we're having this weird juxtaposition of the games coming out are really, really good, but the industry looks sick. And that's possible because you have to keep in mind that games coming out this year didn't just start development this year. They started development 4, 5, 6 years ago. And what's concerning to me is that we're seeing all of these trials and tribulations for these studios and publishers. And my concern is 3, 4, 5 years from now. And the games that are getting started right now in the middle of all this turmoil, like, are they ever going to come out? what quality are they going to be at, and things like that. And so it's a bummer. So this Naughty Dog story, they laid off 25 contracted workers, and apparently one of them spoke anonymously, I believe it was to Jason Schreier, and pointed out that Last of Us multiplayer game, it was called Factions, or at least that's what people were calling it. I remember people thinking that some of the concept art kind of looked like The Division, and it was supposed to be this open world multiplayer The Last of Us game. And it originally started scope as being something fairly small, and then it got bigger to the point where they were going to take their time to really work on it. And now I believe one of these people who was laid off spoke anonymously and pointed out that this multiplayer game isn't necessarily canceled, but it's probably indefinitely delayed, or it's on ice. And typically that means that it may not be canceled yet. It probably will be. This comes alongside rumors that they are doing a remaster of The Last of Us 2 already, which is just like, Sony's been catching hell for this with the way that they do, especially with The Last of Us. But you know what? People are going to buy it. People are going to go out and pay $70 for it. And so people can moan and groan about some of this, like, arguably anti-consumer stuff from Sony, but as long as they keep buying their consoles and keep buying the things that they consider are bad, like the part 1 quote unquote remake, and what's probably going to be with this The Last of Us 2 remaster, and then after that they're probably going to release a The Last of Us part 1 and 2 package that's going to be like $100. People can get mad about it and moan and groan about it. I think it sucks because like these kind of updates, what's frustrating about it is that if it's a straight up remake like part 1 was for The Last of Us, that's somewhat reasonable to charge for and do. But the problem is that, like, it's almost certain that this The Last of Us 2 remake or remaster, it's probably a remaster, that should just be an update to the game. Like, I understand that maybe they're putting in a ton of time and money into doing it, and so they or Sony feels like they should be compensated for that, but they already made probably they probably did well with that game, even though it probably cost a lot to make. I'm sure they made plenty to make up for it, and it's it just gets to the point where it starts to feel kind of greedy and anti-consumer, where we've seen Xbox especially do some of their programs where they do where it upgrades the games automatically and stuff like that once those updates come out, and that just seems like the better way to handle this kind of stuff. But we're multiple years into this generation, and I don't really expect Sony or Microsoft to drastically change the way they do these kind of things, especially when they make money off of them. So hopefully, I'm sure Naughty Dog is fine as a studio. It's just my guess is that they are focusing very heavily on their next big project, which seems like is pretty commonly assumed to be The Last of Us 3. So we'll have to see if they formally announce that sooner than later. Cyberpunk 2 might have a third-person option. So there were some interviews this week in the aftermath of Phantom Liberty, and one of the devs talked about how they didn't regret making Cyberpunk 1, 2077, a first-person only game, but that there is a possibility that the next game that they have already started on could have a third-person option as well. This is a little disingenuous to me, because if I remember correctly, Cyberpunk 1 was supposed to have a third-person mode as well, and they cut it because they basically probably didn't have time to do it, because you have to consider that if you have a game that's first or third person, you have to do animations for both of those, and you have to do the full set of all of the animations, not to mention that Cyberpunk 2077 is a game that has where you can like look down and see your character's feet and stuff. Like there's some games where when you're in the player character's point of view, your body doesn't actually exist beyond like the arms you see in front of you, but there's other games like Cyberpunk where the camera is in the character model's like eyes, and you can look down and see yourself, and I understand why that's probably a difficult thing to do development wise. And then what we know about Cyberpunk 1 after it released, and that it was kind of rough, in that they, it was probably good that they cut the third person thing, or else it would have just been another big load on their studio that they obviously weren't prepared to do, considering the state of the game when it released. So, we'll see. It's really interesting. When I was talking about the BioWare story, the Cyberpunk is a really good example of how a studio's reputation can get pretty down in the dumps. CDPR, CD Projekt Red, was catching a lot of hell for bad business practices. They straight up lied about Cyberpunk. They very blatantly hid the issues with the last gen versions of the game. They just did a lot of kind of shady stuff, and they released a game that was extremely buggy, that was not quite the game that they advertised, and then it took over $100 million and multiple years to get the game even to a state that it probably should have released in. But now everyone's singing its praises. There's people who think Phantom Liberty should be Game of the Year. I think that's insane, but there's people who are there. And as a testament to how, BioWare should maybe be a little bit hopeful about being able to recover, is that Cyberpunk 2077, I believe, sold like 13 or 14 million copies in the first month. The estimates I saw about returns, because that was a big thing, like, oh, everyone's returning, it was like 250,000. And I bet a lot of those people have repurchased the game since then. And then now they announced this week that they sold 25 million copies, which means that they have only sold 10 million more copies. Only 10 million is a lot. 10 million sales at all is really good for a game. But it's just, you have to remember that as much controversy as there was and stuff like that, be it because of pre-orders or hype, or remembering that like the vast majority of gamers aren't eternally online, like a lot of us don't pay attention to Twitter and YouTube and all that. They just see games they want to play and they play them. That game still was insanely successful, even when it was still a complete mess. In that first month, when Cyberpunk was still a complete crap show, it probably made back its money and many times more in that first month, with 15 million in sales almost. So if people ever think that a studio is really down and out and can't ever come back, I would disagree. I would say it's always a possibility, and I think Cyberpunk has been a really good example of that, or a really bad example, depending on how you look at it. Redfall is back in the news. Oddly enough, it is getting a huge, I believe, a 2.0 update. It's one of few really big patches they've had since it came out early in the summer, but it's adding a ton of things that people had their main gripes about. It has a 60 FPS mode on Series X. It's changed the enemy AI a lot. It's changed the gunplay and just the general feel of the game a lot. I guess it's made the open world a lot more interactive and have a lot more activities. It kind of sounds like it's getting close to the game it was originally hoped to be. What's interesting is there's been a lot of conversation I've seen in the last day or two about this, and that, is it too late for Redfall? And what's interesting is that Redfall got written off so quickly that I actually think it has a better chance of having some kind of bounce back than if it would have had a little bit better of a reception and been drawn out more, but people were still unhappy with it. Where I feel like Redfall came out, everyone was like, nope, that sucks, I'm not gonna play it. And like I didn't even get that sour of a taste. Like I played it for an hour or two, and I was like, wow, this is awful, I do not want to play this anymore. But I don't have this, I don't hate Redfall. I just, it was on Game Pass, I downloaded it, I played it for a couple hours, I didn't like it, I deleted it, it was fine. And now because it's on Game Pass, they have this big update. I'm kind of waiting to see some chatter about it, but if there's any good vibes around it, I'll just download it and play it again. And if it really feels better, then I'll play it more. And I saw some people being like, it's not too late for Redfall to be Game of the Year. I mean, it probably is, let's be honest. But I think it isn't too late for it to have that was a complete mess when it came out, but it actually is a pretty cool game now, and you should check it out. That studio, I believe it's Arcane, is a good studio. And so I don't think anyone really believed that the game that came out was the game they really believed in and wanted to make. And then, it didn't help that Xbox, executives basically threw it under the bus and were like, yeah, we never, like, they basically didn't care about that game. They let them make it because they tried to be hands off, but they basically didn't support it in any way, shape, or form. And, had Starfield come out when it was originally meant to, Redfall wouldn't have been such a bad look. But because Redfall ended up being the first party game in like a year and a half to come out, I think since basically Halo Infinite, like big game, and then it ended up getting more attention than it was probably meant to have, and it definitely wasn't ready for it. So, Redfall, if I'm willing to give it another shot, and maybe you should too. That's a you decision. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 has had its big reveal. They do this every time with this game where they bring in like 200 content creators and do big big multiplayer tournaments and stuff like that. From what I saw, I'm a sucker for Call of Duty. I really wish that you could just buy the story for like $10, because the multiplayer, I'm like too old now. I just can't compete like I used to in it, even though I actually do still enjoy it. I'm always good for like a month or two to play it and have fun with it. And it looks good. They're adding little bits and bobs, and the game's pretty, and it looks like a lot of fun. From what we've seen so far, the story seems like it's going to be great. I just don't think I can justify $70 to do that. And it's like one of those things where I'm like, come on, acquisition, just go through and then put this game on Game Pass. I believe Modern Warfare 3 does actually have a marketing deal with Sony, though, and those marketing deals almost always come with an agreement that they will not put it on Game Pass for a long time, if ever. And so I'm really curious to how that's going to work. Sony's, Sony and Microsoft, their deals have held up even after acquisition. There were games that Bethesda ZeniMax owned that still came out exclusive on Sony even after the acquisition, because that was the deal that was agreed on. And so I'm really hoping that maybe Modern Warfare 3 eventually makes it to Game Pass so I can play through the story, because I really enjoy it. But I just don't think I can do the full price, because I just don't really care about the multiplayer anymore. It's not because it's not worthy of being cared for. It's because I'm getting old. Speaking of that acquisition, it's believed that the Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard King is pretty likely to go through in on the 13th of this month in October. It's expected that the CMA over in Great Britain or in England is going to United Kingdom, whatever, is going to approve the deal next week, and they're probably going to move pretty quickly after that. And hopefully this whole saga can finally pass us by. I'm ready to just move on to the next deal everyone's going to complain about. Hit the news that this week 5 former Ubisoft executives were arrested for sexual misconduct. One of them was a fellow named Serge. That's notable. Keep that in mind for a second. So this was a long time ongoing investigation by French authorities into a bunch of accusations that came out about Ubisoft executives a couple of years ago, and a lot of it was kind of the still toxic, but more like typical, like people being fired because of their race or gender and stuff like that. Like stuff that unfortunately we kind of come to expect, especially from these kind of older school ran companies like Ubisoft. But then a bunch of the accusations were like really over the top, and like had to deal with a lot of like really awful stuff. And I'm glad to see these people paying for it. An interesting tidbit is this Surge fella was, from what I've been told, is basically the reason the Division franchise even exists. And it sucks to know that a thing that I enjoy and that has been a big deal to me was kind of championed by this like piece of junk. And it definitely puts kind of a gross taste into that. But it seems like they're hopefully going to pay their dues now, and hopefully, Ubisoft can, root out these issues. But I think as long as their leadership is there, who's there, it's probably never going to be fully fixed. Then I do have a few content updates. I said it before, but I have finally attained YouTube partnership. That's really exciting. So if on the YouTube page, you should notice there is a join button. You can join as a member. It's kind of like a subscription on Twitch. It's $1, $5, or $10, and there are some little bonuses you can see in there. You also do get like little subscriber badges and emotes to use when I live stream, which I do plan on doing. I'm live streaming on Twitch and YouTube now. I have an easy way to do it, and so you can, if you're a member on YouTube, you can come in and show off some of those cool bonuses. You can also do, I think it's like a super chat when I do stream, or a super thanks or something on videos. If you want to throw me a few bucks, help me continue to upgrade my setup and justify the time I spend on this stuff, I very much appreciate it. Patreon, I think I mentioned before, has done a bunch of changes and updates. They have like they've like redesigned their app and their website, and it looks like they're trying to get more like social stuff into their system. I'll utilize as much of the tools as they offer, but my Patreon folks seem to just enjoy throwing me a few bucks and checking out the content when it comes out. So if there's any features or anything like that you want from Patreon, or if you aren't a patron and you would be if I did a certain thing, just let me know. I'm willing to consider almost anything. Then the last thing is the Twitter account for this podcast, at the Baunfire, is, I'm only going to use it to post new episodes and ask for topics and questions. I've been using it to like retweet industry stories and stuff like that, and it just seems it's really cluttered. It's really distracting to try to keep up on. So I have a @BonDiesel account on Twitter that I'm pretty much going to exclusively use for retweeting and quoting and posting all my content and stuff like that. The Baunfire account is just going to be for the podcast. So if you want to follow it to see when new stuff comes out, that's what I would do. Listener questions. We have one question from Master Prime this week. If you have your own questions, be sure to check out the Google form questionnaire that I have posted in the Discord, and I posted on my Twitter as well. You can join the Discord and ask questions or propose topics in there. You can ask in the YouTube comments, and I will be sure to write it down for next week, or you can hit me up on Twitter @BonDiesel or @the Baunfire. This week's questions come from Master Prime. The first question is, do you expect Mass Effect 4 at least in 2027? Yeah, so Dreadwolf should come out in 2024. I would expect, we know that they're in pre-production on Mass Effect right now, and they have been probably for the last 2 or 3 years at least, and maybe even longer. So I'm expecting that to have a 2 or 3 year production cycle. So if that really starts in 2025, I would say 2027, maybe 2028 is most realistic at this point. That is notable because we know that Xbox is targeting 2028 for their next gen of consoles, and so I'll be really curious if this game ends up being like an end of this generation game, which can be good because they've typically figured out the consoles, and then they have the power of the new consoles to use, and it will be many years into Unreal Engine 5, so a lot of its issues and bugs that they're having issues with should be figured out by then, so that quality wise should be a good thing. But man, that's a long time to wait. So, but yeah, I think 2027 is a pretty realistic date for the next Mass Effect. Second question, in what game would you like to write a piece of media or lore? It'd probably be The Division. I feel like there's like basically a unlimited number of stories and scenarios that you could come up with or explore in that universe, because it's just so vast, and so little has really been explored. So I think that's a good one. And then Baldur's Gate 3, just because you could be so silly with it, you could have a lot of fun with doing something like that. So maybe those would probably be my 2 choices. Then the last question, would you like to have changeable, basically like skins on the Xbox Series X, like they do on the PlayStation? Not really. I actually think that those like magnetic foldable things that they put out recently for the Series X is a really good solution. Doing the panels that pop off and stuff like that, to me, is just like another point of, like another complication. It's Sony is very much into their aesthetic, where I think Microsoft is much more, bare bones, and we've seen that with these most recent consoles. I think it's cool that they have the panels that pop off and they can replace them and stuff, but I'm perfectly happy to. I mean, my Xbox is, I haven't seen my Series X in months. It's underneath this table that I do all my stuff on. It's actually sitting on top of a subwoofer. I can't see it. I think I've seen my Xbox Series X for like 5 minutes since I've owned it. I just don't really look at it. So I'm not too worried about it, but I'm sure there's plenty of people who wish there were some more interesting options to do. I do wish they would do more special edition consoles, though, that have like unique paint jobs and stuff like that on them. That would be pretty cool, but we'll see if they ever do that. And that's where we're going to wrap this baby up. So thank you for listening. Thank you so much. If you have any feedback or any thoughts on the show, always feel free to reach out to me and let me know. I'm always happy. I'm willing to hear feedback and criticisms and such, as long as they're nice. You can find me all over the internet as Bond Diesel on all social media, and then over at Twitch you can find me as Bond Diesel, where I do try to stream a couple times a week, and that also will appear on YouTube, so you can follow me there as well. If you want to support my content, please check out patreon.com/BondDiesel. You can subscribe over at Twitch, especially if you have an Amazon Prime free sub. You can become a member on my YouTube at $1, $5, or $10 tiers, or you can check out my merch at the link down in the description and the pinned comment. That's all I have for this one, so until next time.